You wake to the sound of marble cracking under the weight of golden statues. The statues are new, in fact, for Rome's ancient streets. Each one carved not of Jupiter or Mars, not of Neptune or Venus, but of one man, one living man. A man who believes himself a god, and that man is your emperor. The year is 39 AD. You are a senator of Rome. Your sandals scuff nervously on the polished floor of the Palatine Hill's Great Hall as the morning unfolds. Outside, sunlight flashes against the gilded roofs of the imperial palace. Inside, the air is thick with perfume rose and cinnamon ground into heavy oils that coat every curtain, every robe, every servant's wrist. The sweetness burns your nose. Mingling with something else you can't quite shake, fear. The sour musk of fear seeping from the pores of every man standing here. At the center, perched on a throne draped in purple, is Emperor Gaius Julius, Caesar Augustus, Germanicus. History will remember him by a nickname, a soldier's pet name Caligula, Little Boots, the affectionate title given to him as a boy when he dressed in miniature armor and marched alongside his father's legions on the Rhine frontier. It was supposed to be charming, innocent, yet nothing feels innocent about the man staring at you now. He is 23 years old, his hair brushed forward in golden curls, his pale eyes fixed on a horse standing calmly beside him. The horse's name is Insidious, and Caligula strokes its neck as he idly asks which senator should die today. The silence in the room is suffocating. Your colleague Senator Edward Graves shifts beside you, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitch. Senator William Harding's hands tremble as he clasps them in prayer. None of you speak. You have seen what happens when someone answers. This is Rome in the age of Caligula. But only 2 years ago, you and every other senator in this chamber were singing his praises. When he first came to power in 37 AD, after the long, suffocating reign of Emperor Tiberius, the people erupted in joy. Caligula was the son of Germanicus, Rome's beloved general, the man the public had worshipped almost as much as they feared his adoptive father. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, came from a line of nobility that stretched back to Augustus himself. Young Caligula was royal blood and military legend combined in one handsome, charismatic youth, and at first he played the part perfectly. He freed political prisoners, restored long-forgotten elections. He gave bonuses to the Praetorian Guard, the soldiers who guarded his life, and even staged public games for the ordinary citizens. For a brief, glittering moment, it seemed Rome had found her golden boy. Remember standing in the Senate when crowds chanted his name, when mothers held up their children hoping the emperor might bless them as he passed. But the glow didn't last. Something changed in the autumn of 38 AD. A mysterious illness struck the emperor down. Fever consumed him for weeks. His body convulsed, his lips foamed, and physicians whispered that the gods were preparing to take him young. Rome held its breath. Senators visited temples. Ordinary citizens lined up to sacrifice doves, lambs, even oxen. And then he lived. The empire rejoiced. It should have been a triumph. Yet those closest to him noticed something different in the man who rose from that sick bed. His eyes no longer focused on the living, but on something distant, invisible. He would pause mid-sentence, listening, as though unseen voices whispered secrets only he could hear. Servants found him laughing alone, laughing with no one. His lips moved in silent conversation with gods who had not been summoned, as if Olympus itself had set up camp inside his skull. You might think, well, perhaps he was touched by divinity. Romans had always believed emperors carried some measure of divine favor, but Caligula was not content with favor. He demanded worship. It began subtly. Statue here, an inscription there, a coin pressed with his face glowing like Apollo. But soon, temples across the empire received orders to remove statues of traditional gods and replace them with images of Caligula himself. And because marble was expensive, some statues were built with interchangeable heads, so that Jupiter today could become Caligula tomorrow. Imagine standing in a temple of Mars, god of war, only to find the statue bearing the emperor's grin, his youthful curls. Rome had always honored her gods. Now Rome would bow to one of her own. The senators tried to smile. What choice did they have? But when Caligula constructed private shrines in his palace where he conversed with these statues as if they were dinner guests, people began to whisper. Guards stationed outside his chambers swore they heard voices in the night. 2 voices. One, clearly the emperor's. The other, silence. Yet he laughed, as though the gods themselves were cracking jokes that no mortal ears could catch. And it did not stop at marble or bronze. Religion became theater. Theater became humiliation. Caligula ordered his fellow senators, men like Thomas, Whitfield, and Henry Ashcroft, to bring their wives to ceremonies designed not for Jupiter, not for Venus, but for him. Imagine your wife Elizabeth dragged into the palace, ordered to undress before a golden statue of the emperor, and to recite prayers once reserved for Venus, goddess of love, while her husband is forced to look on. Imagine the rage boiling in your veins, knowing that if you so much as flinch, it will be your blood staining the marble by sunset. Because by then Caligula was discovering something intoxicating. Power alone was not enough. His rule had to be tasted, seen, performed, and above all witnessed. He began seating married women from Rome's most prominent families at his dinners, not for conversation, but for display. They were arranged like ornaments at his table, sometimes on chairs, sometimes at his feet. But their husbands, senators, generals, even consuls were forced to watch as their wives were made to serve wine, or worse, to entertain the emperor's hands while he discussed grain imports or border defenses. You remember one dinner vividly. Senator William Harding's wife Julia, seated beside Caligula, her knuckles white around her goblet. Caligula's hand crept across her thigh as he asked the Senate whether to send reinforcements to the Rhine. Her breath hitched. Harding's eyes locked on yours across the table. His jaw worked furiously, as though he might break his own teeth, but he said nothing. Couldn't. That was the rule of Rome now. Silence. And then came the sisters. Caligula had three: Agrippina, Julia, and Drusilla. Rome had always whispered about imperial excess, but what began as whispers soon became unavoidable. The emperor treated his sisters not as family, but as lovers, parading them openly through the palace, bedding them in chambers where servants could not help but overhear. Of them all, Drusilla held his heart. When she died suddenly in 38 AD, fever, poison, or divine retribution. No one knows. The emperor's grief shook Rome, but grief was not the right word. Obsession is closer. He declared Drusilla a goddess, her cult established with temples and priests. But that wasn't enough. He visited her chambers daily, speaking to her clothes, her jewelry, her cosmetics. Servants swore they saw him arranging her gowns as though she might walk through the door at any moment, whispering his secrets into silk. And worse, much worse, rumors spread that he delayed her burial, that he lay with her lifeless body for nights, draping it in oils, reciting poetry, and treating death itself as nothing but another stage in their bond. Can you imagine being a senator of Rome, standing powerless as your emperor straddled the line between grief and desecration? Do you see why every man around you today smells of fear? Because you all understand the truth. This is not grief. This is not worship. This is madness dressed in purple. And yet Caligula is not done, not even close. Because the hunger growing inside him, the need for domination, for spectacle, will not stop with statues or shrines. It will bleed into every corner of Roman life, politics, religion, family, even death itself. And in the days to come, you will see with your own eyes how an emperor can turn every ritual, every feast, every breath of Rome into a theater of humiliation. And you may be wondering, how far can one man fall? How deep can madness sink before even gods look away? Stay with me, because what comes next is not whispered rumor, is carved into marble, inked in scrolls, and echoed in the screams of senators' wives, gladiators, even the emperor's own blood. Caligula's story has only just begun. The marble corridors of the palace have begun to change. Where once senators whispered about grain supply or Germanic raids, now they whisper about their wives' bruises, their daughters' sudden summons to the emperor's chamber, the invitations that are nothing more than commands. Every whisper ends the same way, with silence, with eyes darting to the shadows, with throats closing tight. Because Rome is a city of listeners. Every slave might be a spy. Every guard might be loyal only to the emperor's whims. Caligula has learned something no emperor before him dared test. Humiliation is more powerful than execution. A blade ends a man's life, but shame poisons his legacy. The senators discovered this truth at the emperor's dinners, which are no longer meals, but stages for degradation. Picture it. A long marble table stretching the width of the hall. Lamps glow in iron sconces, casting golden light across dishes of roasted peacock, honey-glazed dormice, and bowls of rare figs imported from Africa. Yet no one tastes the food. Not truly, because everyone is waiting for the performance. Caligula gestures lazily with his jeweled hand. Tonight, it is Senator Thomas Whitfield's wife, Elizabeth, who rises on command. Her gown slips from her shoulders at the emperor's nod. She walks, trembling, across the floor, her steps echoing louder than the distant music of lutes and flutes. Senators watch with fixed smiles, their hands clutching goblets they dare not raise to trembling lips. Caligula laughs. He calls for wine, but not for himself, for Elizabeth, who must serve it on her knees. Her husband sits motionless, face carved in stone. To flinch is to die. To look away is treason. The emperor speaks of taxes, of grain shortages, of the Nile's unpredictable flooding, all while stroking the hair of another man's wife as if she were a lapdog. And then, when the shame has reached its peak, he releases her with a wave, turning back to business as though nothing happened. The senators exhale quietly, their wives adjusting their gowns with trembling hands. But inside, each man feels it. The poison of humiliation burning deeper than any blade. Why kill a senator when you can own him? Why execute a rival when you can turn his bed into your throne? That was Caligula's revelation. But the humiliation of Rome's elite was only one act in his growing theater. The people of the city, too, were drawn into his rituals. He expanded the public games not to honor the gods, but to honor himself, where Julius Caesar had given. Rome's spectacles of gladiators and Augustus had filled the Circus Maximus with chariot races. Caligula turned the arena into a mirror of his madness. At first, it was subtle. Gladiator ordered to pause mid-battle while the emperor laughed. Criminal pardoned on a whim, only to be executed an hour later for entertainment. But soon, his appetite grew bolder. He began ordering senators' wives aristocratic. Women draped in jewels and silks to enter the arena as combatants. Not gladiators trained for war, but women raised in marble villas, forced to clutch wooden swords with trembling hands as crowds roared. Imagine it. The wife of Senator Henry Ashcroft, dressed in a tunic too thin to hide her body, shoved into the sand against a professional fighter. The crowd does not know whether to cheer or weep. Her screams carry through the Colosseum, while Caligula leans forward on his couch, eyes glittering, breath quickening. When the gladiator finally spares her, when she collapses sobbing into the dust, Caligula applauds, as though he has witnessed a divine comedy. What does that do to her husband, forced to watch his wife humiliated before thousands? What does that do to the people, learning that even Rome's nobility can be turned into playthings? It does exactly what Caligula intends. It proves no one is untouchable. And if humiliation is the emperor's currency, then cruelty is his feast. He begins to oversee executions personally, not in the cold efficiency of past emperors, but with the indulgence of a man savoring a rare wine. Condemned senators are brought not to the forum or the steps of the Senate, but to his private baths. There, steam curls through the air, water drips from marble walls, and the emperor, wearing nothing but gold bracelets and a laurel crown, plays God. Witnesses recall Senator William Harding's cousin dragged before him, accused of plotting against the throne. Instead of the swift mercy of the sword, Caligula took up a knife himself, cutting flesh slowly, pausing to sip wine as the man screamed. Guards watched in silence, their faces pale, their armor slick with condensation. Ow. What do you do when your emperor prefers his executions half-naked, bathed in steam, blood running into the pools where he later reclines? You endure, you survive. And the emperor does not stop with people. He begins to blur the line between man and beast, human and animal, ritual and parody. In Citadus, his beloved horse becomes more than a symbol. At first, the animal dines with him, fed oats, mixed with gold flakes, drinking from bowls, carved from ivory. Then, rumors spread. Caligula intends to make Incitus a consul of Rome, a mockery of the Senate itself. Senators laugh nervously, unsure if it is a jest. But jest or not, invitations arrive for wedding feasts where Caligula and Incitus exchange vows. Servants carry platters of bread, roasted lamb, and wine, setting them before the horse, while the emperor declares his eternal devotion. And then comes the strangest part. Caligula does not hide this ritual. He speaks openly of sleeping beside the animal, of whispering state secrets into its ear, of trusting the beast more than any senator. At first, it seems madness, but in truth, it is brilliance. Because every time you, a senator of Rome, hear him praise the horse, you know what he is saying without words. I trust a beast more than I trust you. What kind of man marries his horse? Madman, yes, but also a strategist. Because when senators laugh behind their hands, when they whisper about insanity, they forget that laughter itself is dangerous. Every chuckle is reported. Every whisper is logged. And men who laugh too loudly vanish before sunrise. The paranoia spreads like mold through marble halls. Senators speak less, wives tremble more, guards stand stiff at attention, not because of loyalty, but because their eyes have seen too much and cannot unsee it. And always, always the emperor watches. But here's the chilling truth. Caligula does not only crave obedience, he craves witnesses. Pleasure means nothing to him in private. Every humiliation, every cruelty, every stroke of his hand on another man's wife must be seen. Without witnesses, it is meaningless. Without fear, he is nothing. That is why he drags you all into his theater, why he forces Rome to sit at his table and pretend the nightmare is normal. You ask yourself, how much longer can this continue? How much deeper can one man drag an empire into madness? Surely Rome cannot survive a god who bleeds, a god who laughs at corpses, a god who whispers his secrets to a horse. But the answer is darker still. Rome will not only survive, it will adapt. Because once you have bowed to madness, once you have witnessed the emperor's hand slide across your wife's leg while discussing military strategy, once you have cheered in an arena while aristocrats are thrown to gladiators, survival becomes complicity, and complicity becomes chains. And if you think you have seen the worst, stay. Because Caligula has not yet reached the depths. What comes next is not just humiliation, not just spectacle, but the annihilation of everything Rome once held sacred: family, marriage, even death itself. Because Caligula is about to prove that not even the grave can deny him. The whispers begin after Drusilla dies. Some say it was fever, others whisper poison, but all agree on one thing. Caligula's grief is not like other men's grief. It is not the heavy silence of mourning or the red-eyed weeping of a brother. His grief is theatrical, consuming, grotesque. On the day she dies, palace servants hear wails echoing through the halls, like a wounded animal caught in iron jaws. Senators rush to offer condolences, but none dare step too close. For when Caligula emerges, his eyes are not the eyes of a grieving brother. They are the eyes of a man who has lost something more than blood, something he cannot explain and perhaps cannot admit. He calls her divine. He orders temples built in her honor, priests sworn to her worship. He does not simply mourn Drusilla, he deifies her. Statues of her face rise in marble courtyards. Her likeness appears on coins. Her name is invoked in public prayers. Rome is forced to kneel not just before Caligula, but before his dead sister. But what happens behind closed doors is darker still. Servants tell of the emperor slipping into her chambers long after her death, carrying with him perfumes and oils, whispering to her clothes as if they answer back. They find him seated before her vanity, stroking the handle of her comb, laughing at jokes no one else can hear. Her bed remains untouched by servants, sheets stained, pillows arranged as though waiting for her return. And then come the rumors more terrible still, the whispers that her body, unburied for days, did not lie in silence, that he visited her. Corpse touching her as though she still breathed, speaking to her as though she still loved, that he treated her death not as an end, but as a new phase of their union. Do you believe it, or do you doubt? Perhaps it is slander propaganda whispered by senators who hate him. But when you stand in those marble halls, when you see the priests lighting candles to Drusilla's memory, when you watch the emperor pour wine on the ground and speak to the shadows as though she is listening, you begin to wonder. And then you realize whether the stories are true or false. It does not matter, for the effect is the same. Rome now believes its emperor lies with the dead, and in that belief, power festers. This fixation with death does not stop with Drusilla. It spreads like a disease through the emperor's rituals. He begins to demand that executions become spectacles not of justice, but of intimacy. Prisoners are not dispatched quickly, but dragged before him in chains. He insists on watching their faces as the knife cuts deep, as the life drains from their eyes. One senator, Henry Dalton, accused of conspiracy, is summoned to Caligula's bathhouse. Steam curls through the room, marble sweating with condensation. Caligula reclines naked but for his golden crown, sipping wine as Dalton is stripped before him. And then calmly, with the gentleness of a lover, the emperor begins to cut him. Slowly, patiently, a scream. Pause for a sip of wine. Another scream. Another pause to stroke his own thigh. Witnesses describe it as a ritual, as if suffering itself were an offering to whatever god Caligula believed himself to be. You wonder, is this madness? Or is it the ultimate logic of absolute power? For what could make a man feel more divine than the power to decide how long a soul lingers on the edge of eternity? But Caligula is not content with watching others die. He turns death into theater, dragging Rome's nobility into his grotesque pageants. He orders aristocratic women wives and daughters of senators to strip in the arena and fight gladiators. He does not care if they survive. He only cares that their fear entertains him. And when they collapse in the sand, when the crowd screams, when husbands stand frozen with shame, Caligula smiles. Each spectacle is more outrageous than the last. One evening, he forces Senator Edward Marshall and his wife Catherine to perform a play in the palace courtyard. The script, written, by Caligula himself, demands that Catherine confess adultery while removing her gown piece by piece. Edward is forced to declare his forgiveness while she kneels before the emperor. The audience is senators and guards, each one too terrified to look away. And when the play ends, when Catherine lies sobbing in the dust, Caligula applauds as though he has witnessed high art. But perhaps the most disturbing pageant involves his infant daughter, Julia Drusilla. Born of his marriage to Cornelia, she is barely a year old when Caligula declares her divine. He holds her naked before senators, demanding they bow and offer prayers. He speaks of her future as a goddess, of her eternal companionship beside him, and then, in whispers that spread like wildfire through the palace, servants report ceremonies too vile to repat rituals that blur the line between devotion and desecration. Even in Rome, a city accustomed to decadence, these rumors make stomachs churn. But what can anyone do? To accuse is to die. To look away is to survive. It is in these years that senators stop speaking freely, even in their own homes. Wives do not whisper to husbands. Slaves do not dare gossip. The city is filled with silence, broken only by the echo of Caligula's laughter. But here's the rehook. If you think this is the height of madness, you are wrong. Because Caligula is about to expand his theater beyond Rome's walls. His appetite will reach the legions, the provinces, even the seas themselves. And when it does, the empire will tremble under the weight of one man's delusions of godhood. Because humiliation in the Senate is one thing, desecration in the arena is another. But what happens when a man who believes himself divine commands entire armies? What happens when the gods of Rome are told to step aside for a 25-year-old tyrant with a crown of gold and a heart of wrought? That answer is coming. The empire is a stage, and Caligula is its playwright. And what began as whispered rumors in marble halls soon stretches across provinces, legions, seas. He no longer confines his theater to senators and their wives. Entire Roman Empire is cast in his grotesque drama. He orders temples stripped of Jupiter, Mars, Venus, replacing their faces with his own. Marble gods are decapitated, their heads swapped for busts of the emperor. In towns from Britannia to Egypt, worshippers kneel not to the old pantheon, but to Caligula, living God, Lord of heaven and earth. Do you see what he has done? Rome's gods, once eternal, now were the smirk of a 25-year-old tyrant. When priests resist, he drags them into his chambers. There, surrounded by incense and silk, he demands their worship through rituals, too obscene to speak aloud. These ceremonies blur into orgies, into humiliations, into offerings where the sacrifice is dignity itself. You might ask, was anyone safe? And the answer is no. Even the army, Rome's backbone, becomes part of his theater. One year he leads legions north, claiming to march on Germania. Soldiers steel themselves for war. Supplies are gathered. Scouts whisper of enemy tribes. Then, at the border, Caligula halts the march. He raises his hand. He orders his men not to fight Germans, but to collect seashells. Yes, seashell. With solemnity, he commands soldiers to comb the beaches, filling baskets with shells as trophies of victory over Neptune, god of the sea. Legionnaires hardened by war, men who have bled for Rome shuffle along the shore, pockets rattling with seashells, wondering if the world has tipped off its axis. And here's the cruelty. When they return, Caligula parades these shells through Rome as spoils of conquest. Senators are forced to applaud. Citizens cheer, unsure if laughter will mean their deaths. And in the shadows, soldiers mutter, "For nothing is more dangerous than a humiliated army." But Caligula does not see danger. He sees only himself. Brighter than Jupiter, stronger than Mars, wilder than Bacchus, he sees a god. The palace itself transforms into his stage. Walls are torn down to blend staterooms with private chambers, so politics and perversion bleed into each other. Imagine walking into a meeting on taxation, only to find your wife naked before the emperor. Senators forced to clap as though this is all perfectly natural. Boundaries dissolve. No one knows what tomorrow will demand policy or degradation. And then there are the plays. A theater performed by actors, but by Rome's elite, compelled to strip, to confess, to perform acts scripted by the emperor himself. Senator William Harcourt and his wife Elizabeth are forced to enact adultery before the court, each line penned by Caligula. He sits in the center, directing, critiquing, touching himself as they obey. This is not entertainment. Is domination, psychological warfare, masked as art? Do you think there was any limit? There wasn't one festival, Saturnalia, traditionally a time of merriment and gifts, becomes his masterpiece of degradation. He orders a temple constructed not to Saturn, but to himself. Citizens pour in, expecting laughter and revelry. Instead, They find themselves part of a vast ritual where worship means surrendering their bodies. Men and women alike are forced into acts of submission, while Caligula is perched on a golden throne, watches with fever-bright eyes. Saturnalia becomes not a feast, but a nightmare. His appetite devours even his guards, the Praetorians, Rome's. Elite soldiers sworn to protect him find themselves drawn into his intimate rituals. He orders them to stand motionless while he performs sexual acts mere feet away, demanding their silence as proof of loyalty. Sometimes he forces them to participate. Their discipline, bending under the weight of humiliation, is a dangerous currency. You can spend it for a time, but eventually, it bankrupts loyalty. Centurion Cassius, Sharia stoic, loyal, patient endures months of these rituals. He watches his men reduced from soldiers to props in the emperor's twisted performances, and something inside him snaps. He begins to whisper to others, senators, fellow guards, men equally broken by the emperor's madness. Conspiracy takes root, watered by shame, nourished by rage. Meanwhile, Caligula grows bolder. His seizures return, his hallucinations intensify. He speaks to gods no one else can see, laughs at jokes no one else can hear. He insists that guards witness his divine conversations, that senators applaud his heavenly wisdom. Behind those pale blue eyes, paranoia blooms like a poisonous flower. He knows they hate him, tastes it in the silence, sees it in the stiffness of their bows. But he believes himself untouchable. He believes fear will protect him. It is this arrogance that kills him. The day begins like any other, with ceremonies, humiliation, the endless theater of godhood. But when Caligula steps into a narrow, underground passage, beneath the palace a shortcut to the theater, the conspirators strike. Cassius Sharia is first. His blade plunges into the emperor's chest. Others follow, stabbing, slashing, a frenzy of steel and vengeance. Caligula, the living god, shrieks, not with divine thunder, but with the voice of a terrified man. His body collapses onto cold stone, bleeding, twitching, human, after all. And here is the twist. They do not stop with him. They kill his wife, Cornelia, and his infant daughter, Julia Drusilla. Why? Because the corruption cannot be contained? His rituals have stained them too deeply. Rome decides not just to erase the emperor, but to purge his entire line, as if to cauterize a wound before the rot spreads further. The empire breathes again. Senators exhale. Guards unclench fists. Citizens whisper prayers of relief. But Rome does not forget. For years afterward, whenever senators walk past the marble corridors of the Palatine, they remember the plays, the humiliations, the seashells paraded as trophies. Whenever soldiers march along the shore, they glance at seashells scattered in the sand and laugh bitterly at the memory of conquest turned into farce. And whenever lovers hold each other in private, they remember the emperor who turned intimacy into theater, into domination, into something so grotesque, it still haunts the ruins where tourists walk today. And here is your final re-hook. Was Caligula mad? Or was he the truest mirror of absolute power? For what is madness but a man freed from consequence? What is godhood but the absence of restraint? Caligula died, stabbed in the dark, but his shadow lingers wherever men believe themselves above morality, beyond judgment. In palaces, in boardrooms, in war rooms, his ghost still whispers, "You are untouchable. You are divine. You can take what you want." Maybe that is the real horror. Not that Caligula lived, but that he is never entirely gone.